00 on the morning of December 17, 1944, in the town of Honsfeld, Belgium, the engine of a Tiger tank sputtered and died. SS Colonel Joachim Peiper, the tank's commander, struck the turret hatch in frustration as his driver, Unscher Weber, desperately tried to restart the powerful 700 horsepower Maybach engine. 0:15 but the fuel gauge read empty, and Weber's panicked voice soon confirmed that the reserve tank was also dry. 0:23 Peiper climbed down from the immobilized tank, his boots crunching on the frozen Belgian soil. Around him, the formidable armored spearhead assembled by the Wehrmacht for Operation Watch on the Rhine, the Ardennes offensive, now sat motionless. The morning fog shrouded the scene as Peiper surveyed the abandoned American outpost of Honsfeld, a critical supply depot for the U.S. 99th Infantry Division. To his astonishment, the hasty retreat had left behind a veritable treasure trove: 67 tanks, 149 half-tracks, and nearly 5,000 of Germany's elite Waffen-SS soldiers, all paralyzed by empty fuel tanks. Amidst the smoldering oil drums and steaming metal cups, Peiper's gaze fell upon rows of olive-drab American fuel containers, a bounty that seemed almost divinely ordained. Cautiously, his adjutant Hauptfeldführer Hans Gruller pried open one can and took a whiff of the benzene-laced contents. Oschanführer gazed upon the towering stockpile of 152 high-octane gasoline as his troops hastily refueled their vehicles. Peiper strolled 159 through the vast supply, meticulously counting. The sheer numbers were staggering. 50,205 gallons, enough to power his entire combat group for the push to the Meuse River. 210 enough to potentially alter the course of the offensive. The Americans had abandoned more fuel in this single depot 217 than most German divisions had received in the past half-year. Yet, as Peiper stood amidst this windfall, observing his 224 men pouring American fuel into German tanks, a crushing realization descended 229 upon him like the morning mist. If the Americans could afford to abandon such quantities, if they could leave behind 236 what? The Third Reich had entrusted the defense of its territory to entire military formations, but this strategy had already proven futile. Germany's leadership had not merely miscalculated, they had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of their adversaries. 6 months before Peiper's pivotal discovery at Honsfeld in June 1944, Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, had presented the Führer with a report that should have compelled an immediate cessation of offensive operations. Germany's synthetic fuel production, the lifeblood of the Wehrmacht, had been systematically decimated by Allied bombing campaigns. The Lüneburg facility, which had generated 175,000 tons of fuel in April, managed a mere 5,000 tons by September. The hydrogenation plants at Pitz, Blehammer, and Brux were operating at less than 10% of their capacity. The grim statistics told a clear story. The United States, in 1944, emerged as a petroleum powerhouse, churning out an astounding 1.8 billion barrels of crude oil. In stark contrast, Germany, including its synthetic production in seized Romanian fields, managed a meager 33 million barrels, a paltry 2% of American output. The Third Reich, in its attempt to wage mechanized warfare, found itself grappling with the limitations of horse-drawn logistics. While the United States was awash in a sea of petroleum abundance, Major Friedrich Simon of the Wehrmacht's Logistics Command had meticulously calculated that the Ardennes offensive would require a staggering 4.5 million gallons of fuel to reach Antwerp. Though Hitler allocated 5 million gallons, only half of that amount was actually delivered, owing to transportation challenges. The German High Command had gambled the entire offensive on capturing enemy supplies, a risky strategy that. The Waffen-SS commander, Joachim Peiper, was a seasoned veteran of the Eastern Front, having earned the prestigious Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords. At the young age of 29, he was one of the youngest regimental commanders in the elite Waffen-SS. Despite his impressive credentials, Peiper's forces ultimately revealed a terminal weakness rather than strength. Meanwhile, the Americans had constructed a sophisticated logistics network to support their operations in Europe. This included a petroleum pipeline system called PLU, or Pipeline Under the Ocean, as well as the Red Ball Express, a massive truck convoy system that delivered an astounding 12,500 tons of supplies to the front lines daily. By December 1944, American forces in Europe were consuming 1.2 million gallons of fuel per day, while receiving 1.4 million gallons. They were accumulating reserves even as they continued to fight. In the era of modern warfare, fuel proved more precious than ammunition. Peiper's unit had been designated the critical focal point, the decisive point of the entire Ardennes offensive. 2 days prior to the offensive, on December 14, Peiper attended the final briefing at Tondorf. Commanding the 6th SS Panzer Army, General Dietrich was blunt. He stated that they would have sufficient fuel to reach the Meuse if they could capture American supplies. The fuel allocation for Peiper's unit was 31,000 gallons, enough for 50 miles of combat operations. However, the distance to the Meuse was 65 miles. The mathematical odds of failure were inherent in the plan from the outset. As his column prepared to advance on December 16, Peiper issued orders. The German forces were under strict directives to conserve resources during their advance. Tanks were ordered to travel in single file to minimize fuel consumption, and engines were to be shut off whenever halts exceeded 5 minutes. Capturing American fuel depots was a top priority, even surpassing tactical objectives. In stark contrast, the American forces stationed nearby experienced a steady flow of fuel resupply, with the 743rd Tank Battalion receiving its third delivery of 8,000 gallons that week, filling their storage tanks to capacity. As the clock struck 5:30 a.m. on December 16, 1944, the German artillery bombardment that launched Operation Watch on the Rhine expended more ammunition in just 2 hours than the Wehrmacht had used in previous engagements. The German forces had allotted a substantial budget for their entire military operations earlier in the conflict. However, this remarkable display concealed critical resource deficiencies. Peiper's column commenced its movement at 7 a.m., already behind schedule. The roads, which appeared as highways on German maps, were in fact narrow country lanes, many of them unpaved. Within a short time, traffic congestion developed as vehicles designed for the Russian terrain struggled to navigate the Ardennes forest. Upon reaching Lanzarote, Peiper's initial objective, they encountered unexpected resistance from a single American intelligence and reconnaissance platoon of 18 men, who managed to delay the formidable German armored column for nearly 10 hours. During this delay, Peiper's vehicles idled, consuming precious fuel. When they finally broke through and reached Honsfeld at dawn, the situation had become increasingly challenging. On the 17th of December, Peiper's column had traversed 20 miles, expending 40% of their fuel supply. At this rate, they were projected to exhaust their reserves before reaching the halfway point to the MOS. The American supply depot at Honsfeld, though classified as a temporary Class 3B fuel station for the 99th Infantry Division, held an abundance that surpassed the monthly allocation for an entire German panzer division. As Führer Hans Groller later testified, "We discovered pyramids of jerry cans, each containing 5 gallons of gasoline, stacked 3 meters high and extending for approximately 200 meters. The American forces had not yet made any attempts to destroy the captured fuel reserves. The seized fuel was a high-octane aviation gasoline blended with 839 motor fuel of 80 octane or greater. German vehicles, particularly the temperamental 844 Maybach engines in the Tiger tanks, were designed to run on 74-octane fuel. The 850 American gasoline was actually too high quality, causing engine issues in several German vehicles. As Peiper's men 857 refueled, they made additional discoveries. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann, who had worked in his father's import business before the war and could 905 read English, found shipping manifests in the depot office. The documents revealed that this fuel had been 912 transported from Texas to New York, across the Atlantic to Liverpool, across the Channel to Normandy, and then trucked 400 miles. The arduous trek spanning over 6,000 miles had been completed in less than 6 weeks. Hoffman recounted in a 1976 interview how he presented the documents to Joachim Peiper, who read them twice before crumpling them up in silence, his expression turning ashen, a clear indication of the gravity of the situation. Meanwhile, Private Ernst Kara stumbled upon a stack of Stars and Stripes newspapers dated December 15, just 2 days old, with a headline celebrating the inauguration of a new fuel pipeline from Cherbourg to Verdun, capable of delivering 300,000 gallons per day. A staggering amount that exceeded the daily consumption of Kampfgruppe Peiper's entire offensive. The sheer scale of this revelation was truly staggering. By the latter half of 1944, Germany's fuel landscape had drastically changed. Allied bombing had decimated synthetic fuel production, plummeting it by 90% since May. The Luftwaffe found itself grounding aircraft due to the scarcity of aviation fuel, with pilot training hours slashed from 250 to a mere 60. The German Navy's surface fleet had effectively ceased operations, while U-boats resorted to using snorkels to conserve precious diesel by running on batteries for longer periods. On the home front, private automobile traffic had vanished since 1942, with gasoline becoming so scarce that the Gestapo investigated even the theft of individual liters on the black market. Farmers had reverted to using horse-drawn plows. In stark contrast, the United States was producing 67% of the world's oil supply. The East Texas oil field alone outstripped the entire petroleum output of German-occupied Europe. American refineries were operating at such high capacity that Standard Oil was experimenting with new petroleum byproducts, simply because they had an excess of crude. With the 50,000 gallons seized at Honsfeld, Peiper's columns surged forward, reaching Billingen by noon on December 17. There, they captured additional supplies, rations, ammunition, and crucially, maps revealing the locations of other American fuel depots in the area. However, these maps also exposed a troubling truth. The Americans had fuel stockpiles at virtually every major crossroads. The U.S. First Army alone had a staggering 3.5 million gallons in reserve. Undaunted, Peiper pushed on to Lineville, where his forces, the Malmedy massacre, a heinous war crime, claimed the lives of 84 American captives. Tragically, this atrocity was linked to the Nazis' desperate fuel shortages. Peiper, the perpetrator, later claimed he lacked the gasoline to transport the prisoners. By the evening of December 17, Peiper's spearhead had reached Stavello, a major American fuel depot holding over 2 million gallons. This vast stockpile could have ensured the Germans' advance to the Meuse. However, as the first German vehicles approached, American engineers were already in action. Captain John Brewster of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had been alerted to the German advance and was under strict orders to deny the enemy access to the fuel at all costs. The Stavello depot contained 2,189,000 gallons of gasoline, stored in jerrycans and stacked. The fuel depot sprawled across a vast expanse of 15 acres. As the clock struck 16:30 on December 17, Captain Brewster's order rang out. Engineers hastily laid gasoline trails between the stacks, and white phosphorus grenades were swiftly distributed. Technical Sergeant Paul Solis was the first to hurl a grenade, triggering an immediate and colossal explosion. Flames erupted, reaching a staggering height of 100 feet. Within minutes, the entire depot had been consumed by the raging inferno. Peiper's lead tanks arrived to a towering plume of black smoke, rising 1,000 feet into the air. The blaze raged on for 3 days, consuming enough fuel to have powered Peiper's entire division to Antwerp and back. Untaffera Weber's vivid account described the scene, with the Oberschirmführer standing atop his tank turret. Observing the blazing inferno, he remained silent for approximately 5 minutes. Thereafter, he descended and informed me that they could afford to burn 2 million gallons to deny us access. Across the Ardennes region, American engineers were systematically destroying fuel depots to prevent capture. At Tuapen, 1.1 million gallons were set ablaze. Similarly, at Spar, 2.5 million gallons were annihilated. In total, the Americans deliberately destroyed over 8 million gallons during the initial week, exceeding Germany's allocation for the entire operation. This capacity to casually destroy millions of gallons was rooted in a supply system that defied German understanding. The Red Ball Express had delivered 412,000 tons of supplies using 6,000 vehicles. The ceaseless activity of the transport fleet was staggering. Each truck consumed a remarkable 40 gallons per day, outpacing the monthly fuel allotment of the entire German Army Group B. By December 1944, the Motor Transport Service had mobilized 230 truck companies, navigating color-coded routes to deliver an astounding 20,000 tons of supplies daily, including 3,000 tons of precious fuel. As Colonel James Snyder, Chief Logistics Officer for 1st Army, noted on December 18, the previous day's fuel receipts had reached 1,847,000 gallons, with 1,623,000 gallons issued and a net gain of 224,000 gallons to reserves. The pipeline system, however, was the true marvel, with Operation Pluto's underwater pipes pumping 1 million gallons daily from Britain, feeding an extensive inland network. The Cherbourg-Paris pipeline delivered an impressive 800,000 gallons daily, while the Seine 1532 line moved a substantial 650,000 gallons. By December 1944, the Allied forces in Northwest Europe were consuming a staggering 7.5 million gallons per day, with a supply of 8.2 million gallons. They were strategically building reserves during their offensive operations. As Peiper pushed deeper into Belgium on December 18, the futility of the German position became increasingly evident. At Char, they seized another vital depot, where 5,000 gallons were consumed in just 3 hours of combat. The Tiger tanks proved to be fuel guzzlers, consuming 2.5 gallons per mile in battle, while the Panthers burned through 1.5 gallons per mile. In the challenging Ardennes terrain, consumption increased by a significant 40%. Otto Dingeler, the maintenance officer for the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, recorded that, by noon on December 18, the situation had become dire. The American forces closely monitored the German radio transmissions through their advanced intelligence capabilities, gaining valuable insights into the adversary's fuel situation. General Courtney Hodges promptly issued orders to all units, emphasizing the enemy's critical fuel shortage and directing the destruction of any threatened gasoline stocks to prevent their capture. That same day, American C-47 aircraft undertook an impressive 316 sorties, delivering essential supplies, including a substantial 160,000 gallons of fuel, to the besieged garrison at Bastonia. This remarkable airlift operation ensured that the Americans were able to fly more fuel to the encircled troops than Peiper's entire combat group possessed. As Peiper's forces engaged the defenders at Stoumont on December 19, the fuel crisis had reached a critical juncture, forcing tanks to be abandoned with empty fuel tanks rather than risk their capture. Peiper carefully managed his dwindling fuel reserves, retaining approximately 8,000 gallons, sufficient for one more tactical maneuver, but not both engagement and retreat. Meanwhile, Allied strategists were finalizing plans for the upcoming January operations. Brigadier General Maurice Gilland submitted a request for 245 million gallons to support the anticipated activities, which was promptly approved without further discussion. The contrast between the two sides extended beyond just quantities, as the American military had standardized its vehicle fleet for enhanced efficiency. Sherman tanks, for instance, consumed 0.8 gallons per mile, compared to the thirstier German Tigers at 2.5 gallons per mile. Similarly, American trucks achieved 8 miles per gallon even when fully loaded, with parts being interchangeable and maintenance procedures streamlined. In contrast, the German forces operated a bewildering array of captured and domestically produced vehicles, each with its own unique requirements. For example, French tanks needed different oil than the German Panther tanks, and Soviet trucks required distinct replacement parts compared to their German counterparts. The opal deposits presented a series of logistical challenges, each one compounding the difficulties. On December 20, Peiper received a radio message informing him that the fuel convoy had been destroyed by Allied aircraft, making resupply impossible. Peiper gathered his commanders, and Sturmbannführer Vierepertka bluntly stated that they had fuel for perhaps 20 kilometers, while the objective was 30 kilometers away. According to H.T. Mura-Gruller's testimony, the Oberschirmbannführer acknowledged that they were fighting an enemy who burned more fuel to deny it to them than they had received for the entire operation. The capture of Honsfeld, which had seemed miraculous, was nothing compared to the enemy's capabilities. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the 5th Panzer Army, realized that they could not win this battle. The American forces had a staggering fuel advantage over their adversaries during the decisive battle at Jauze on December 21. Colonel Friedrich von Dunder, a captured German officer, marveled at the sheer abundance of resources the Americans possessed, remarking that his men had not seen chocolate in 2 years, while the Americans were burning millions of gallons of fuel. As the battle unfolded, General Peiper found himself surrounded, his tanks immobilized due to the lack of fuel. In contrast, the combined fuel allocation for the 31st Infantry Division, 82nd Airborne, and 3rd Armored Division amounted to a staggering 340,000 gallons for that single day, dwarfing Peiper's meager supply of perhaps 1,000 gallons. As one American soldier, Private First Class Richard McKinney, wrote home, "We've got Germans." The American forces, encircled and facing fuel shortages, were met with a swift and decisive response. Our commander quipped that we expended more fuel heating coffee than the enemy's tanks. The American counterattack at 2022 showcased the pinnacle of industrial warfare. Patton's Third Army pivot northward required a staggering 350,000 gallons of fuel, a logistical feat considered impossible by German standards, yet accomplished in a mere 3 days. On December 23, clear skies allowed Allied aircraft to conduct over 2,000 sorties, each burning fuel at rates that would have grounded the Luftwaffe for weeks. The P-47s consumed 300 gallons per hour, while the B-26s burned 200 gallons hourly. A single day's air operations consumed more than Germany's entire offensive fuel allocation. As night fell on December 23 to 24, Peiper abandoned his vehicles and escaped on foot. The offensive commenced with 119 tanks and assault guns, but only 39 remained operational, albeit immobilized. These were subsequently destroyed using the remaining ammunition. Oberreiter Heinz Goels vividly described the aftermath, recounting how they drained the last 200 gallons of fuel from all vehicles. The commanding officer personally annihilated his own command tank. Millions of Reichsmarks worth of equipment were rendered useless by the depleted fuel reserves. From the initial force of 5,000 men under Kampfgruppe Peiper, only around 770 returned, having advanced 60 miles, captured several depots, and uncovered the truth about Allied logistics. News of Peiper's discoveries swiftly spread through the German command. On December 26, Field Marshal Walter Model received reports detailing the captured American supplies, as noted by his chief of staff. The Field Marshal scrutinized the figures meticulously, double-checking the staggering numbers. 2208 50,000 gallons at Honsfeld, 2 million incinerated at Stivalo, and a staggering 8 million destroyed rather than captured. 2214 he solemnly remarked, "We are no longer fighting the same war." Hitler, 2220 informed on December 28, refused to accept the grim reality. Speer wrote, Hitler insisted the 2228 figures were mere propaganda. When confronted with photographic evidence of the burning Stivalo, he dismissed it as Hollywood trickery, but 2235 the lower ranks understood the gravity of the situation. Greer Wilhelm Hoffmann's letter to his wife painted a bleak picture. 2241. The Americans destroy more fuel daily than we receive monthly. They drive their tanks as if they were marching. 2247 The fuel crisis was symptomatic of a larger truth. By 1944, 2254 America's manufacturing output accounted for half the world's production, churning out a new aircraft every 5 minutes. The staggering petroleum production figures told a compelling story. In 1943, the United States churned out a remarkable 1.8 billion barrels, dwarfing the Soviet Union's 110 million and Germany's 33 million, including synthetic sources. Japan's meager 2.6 million barrels paled in comparison, as the Axis powers combined produced less than 2% of American output. This abundance proved a decisive advantage, enabling the Allies to sustain major offensives that German strategists had difficulty fathoming. On December 27, Lieutenant Colonel Chester Hansen recounted a telling anecdote. A logistics officer had expressed concern over fuel deliveries dropping to only 500,000 gallons daily, until someone pointed out that this still exceeded Germany's total allocation for offensive operations. The captured German prisoners of war from the Ardennes campaign provided a sobering contrast. Stunned by the Americans' profligate ways more than their military might, German soldiers were demoralized by witnessing GIs discard half-eaten rations or use precious gasoline for heating. As Austgau Reichelm told his interrogators, the sheer scale of American production, when contrasted with the Germans' own scarcity, made the futility of their struggle painfully clear. "We knew your output numbers in the abstract," he admitted, "but seeing soldiers waste more than we possessed made it all too real. Every German who glimpsed your casual abundance knew the war was hopeless." This realization spread through the ranks despite censorship, as exemplified by Feldwebel Ernst Muller's lament. "Americans wash clothes in gasoline. They feed chocolate to dogs. They fire artillery for Christmas. We cannot fight infinity." The psychological impact of this disparity undermined the German narratives of racial superiority. How could the supposedly decadent Americans possess such staggering wealth while the master race scraped for basic necessities? This question haunted the German leadership during the Nuremberg trials. Commanders consistently emphasized the pivotal role of logistics, particularly fuel supplies, in the course of the conflict. Field Marshal Kittel attested, "We possessed operational superiority from 1940 to 1941, but by 1944, our inability to move forces due to fuel shortages contrasted sharply with the Americans' capacity to maneuver armies with the ease of chess pieces." Revealing testimony was provided by Peiper, who participated in the Malmedy massacre. "Every decision made after December 17 was influenced by the crippling fuel shortage, which undermined our ability to maneuver, pursue, or retreat effectively, while the Americans enjoyed unimpeded mobility." As General Guderian observed, when Peiper captured 50,000 gallons of fuel, it meant everything to him but nothing to the Americans, signaling the war's end. This narrative resonates as it exemplifies the transition to an era where industrial production, rather than warrior prowess, determined the outcome of wars. The romantic notion of warfare faded in the Ardennes as empty fuel tanks became a grim reality. Dr. Richard Overy's calculations revealed that by 1944, the Allies' production ratios in major categories exceeded those of the Axis by over 5-1. In the case of petroleum, this advantage reached an astounding 50-1. These overwhelming material advantages could not be overcome by superior training or tactics alone. During the war, America produced a staggering 324,750 aircraft, while Germany managed only 119,970. Similarly, the United States built 88,410 tanks, dwarfing Germany's 46,857. But perhaps the most telling statistic was the disparity in oil refining capacity. In 1944 alone, America refined 1.8 billion barrels, compared to Germany's meager 33 million barrels. On December 24, 1944, as Peiper's men slipped through American lines on foot, abandoning 39 tanks, 70 half-tracks, and 177 other vehicles, the magnitude of this imbalance became painfully clear. They had captured 50,000 prisoners, but the strategic advantage had decisively shifted. The morning at Honsfeld was a joyous occasion, as the discovery of American fuel had us celebrating like victors in a lottery. However, our elation was short-lived, for by evening, we learned of the devastating burning of Stavelot, realizing that our triumph was already a distant memory. The sheer scale of American resources was humbling, as the 50,000 gallons we had secured paled in comparison to the voracious appetite of a single armored division, which could consume it in a mere 2 days. Indeed, the Red Ball Express, a logistical marvel, could burn through that amount in a mere 3 hours, rendering our hard-won prize a mere rounding error in the Allies' daily consumption. As Major General J. Lorton Collins later observed, the Germans' desperate attempts to capture fuel only served to reveal their fundamental miscalculation. They had assumed that we valued fuel as they did, unaware of the staggering abundance that the Allies could command. The contrast between our scarcity and their surfeit was a stark reminder of the imbalance of power that would ultimately decide the outcome of the conflict. The Nazis were unable to fathom the sheer scale of American industrial might, as they squandered millions of gallons of precious fuel in a futile attempt to gain a tactical advantage. The disastrous Operation Watch on the Rhine was doomed by the immutable realities of modern warfare. This offensive consumed approximately 2.8 million gallons, a staggering 40% of their overall fuel allocation, with the difference made up from captured supplies. In stark contrast, the Americans consumed 267 million gallons during the same period, nearly 100 times more. The Wehrmacht suffered devastating losses, with 100,000 men, 800 tanks, and 1,000 aircraft destroyed. However, the most crushing blow was the loss of German illusions, as every witness to American abundance realized that Germany was not fighting a war, but rather participating in its own demise. Joachim Peiper, imprisoned until 1956 for war crimes, was murdered at his French home on July 14, 1976. The year 1967 saw a pivotal moment when the renowned historian Henry Lehman uncovered a startling revelation. The discovery of a critical supply depot's demise had been the most devastating setback, as the lack of resources had forced a retreat that compromised dignity. The harsh reality was that while the enemy had an abundance of supplies, the American forces found themselves facing a seemingly insurmountable challenge. This sobering lesson extended far beyond the confines of World War II. In the realm of industrial warfare, the primacy of logistics had become undeniable, overshadowing the significance of tactical prowess. Sheer production capacity had triumphed over the most ardent displays of courage, as overwhelming abundance had vanquished the dedication of the adversary. Despite the German soldiers' superior training and experience in 1944, this advantage proved inconsequential. The American industrial machine's capacity to squander more resources than Germany could produce had been etched into the very fabric of the conflict, from the jerry cans at Honsfeld to the pipelines across France. This fundamental truth had been encoded in every gallon burned at Stivalo, a testament to the shifting dynamics of modern warfare. The industrial powers were determined not by brilliant military leaders, but by the factories and refineries that fueled the war effort. Colonel Trevor Dupuy's calculations revealed that in December 1944, each American soldier was supported by a staggering 67 daily supplies. In contrast, the Germans received a mere 3 pounds per soldier. While the Americans complained about waste, the Germans would have considered such abundance unimaginable. 40 years after the battle, in 1984, veterans gathered at Yas to commemorate the events. The museum proudly displays the Peiper's Tiger tank, still positioned where it had run out of fuel on December 23, 1944. Former Unratszier Karl Wortmann stood beside the tank, alongside former Staff Sergeant Roy Anderson of the 30th Infantry Division. Anderson expressed his puzzlement, "We always wondered why you stopped. We thought it was tactical." Wortmann's bitter laughter was the only response, "We stopped." The German forces faced a daunting challenge as they embarked on their offensive in December 1944. Their fuel reserves were alarmingly low, amounting to only 70% of the minimum required. This stark reality was captured in a poignant exchange between two soldiers, where one quietly acknowledged their disadvantage, stating, "We never knew you were that short. We had so much we never thought about it." This contrast highlighted the stark disparity between the two sides, with one fighting for every precious gallon while the other burned through oceans of fuel. The German War Diary from Army Group B provides a damning record of the unfolding events. On December 16, the offensive commenced, but the fuel situation was already critical. The following day, the Allies managed to capture a significant cache of 50,000 gallons, further depleting the German reserves. By December 18, multiple fuel depots had been destroyed, resulting in the loss of over 5 million gallons. The situation grew increasingly dire, and by December 19, critical German units were immobilized due to the lack of fuel. The outcome of this campaign was all but predetermined, as the German forces found themselves outmatched and outmaneuvered, their mobility and firepower severely hampered by the relentless drain on their fuel supplies. The historical records paint a stark picture of the challenges faced by the German military, a testament to the pivotal role that logistics and resource management played in the course of the war. The American forces faced a critical fuel shortage during the Battle of the Bulge. On December 24, Peiper abandoned his vehicles due to fuel exhaustion. Meanwhile, the First Army reported on December 16 that they had reserves of 3.7 million gallons. However, by December 17, 2.2 million gallons had been destroyed, and on December 18, only 1.8 million gallons were received. By December 24, the reserves had increased to 4.1 million gallons. The Americans treated the fuel shortage with indifference, while the Germans reserved individual cans for their soldiers. Beyond the quantity, the American fuel represented a technological superiority. American refineries had perfected catalytic cracking, producing higher octane fuels more efficiently than the German hydrogenation process. The American 100-octane aviation fuel gave their aircraft a performance advantage over the German planes running on 87-octane synthetic fuel. The Americans had also perfected fuel additives, such as tetraethylene, ethylene, and detergents, which the Germans were unable to replicate. The German engines, designed for lower-quality fuel, often ran poorly on the captured American gasoline. The fuel shortage shaped every soldier's experience, as evidenced by the account of German soldier Hans Müller. The frigid winter's grip tightened as the troops trudged through the snow, their march marked by the eerie silence of abandoned American vehicles, engines left running to provide warmth. On December 20, the exhausted soldiers covered 30 kilometers, but the lack of fuel rendered their trucks useless. 34-10 The medical services, crippled by the harsh conditions, struggled to evacuate the wounded, and hospitals found themselves unable to power their generators. Tragically, men perished as they waited in vain for transportation that never arrived. 34. As Drive. Wilhelm Kirstein of Oberark testified, "We had skilled surgeons and ample supplies captured from the Americans, but without fuel for the ambulances, men who could have been saved died within 10 kilometers of aid." 34-34 The grim realities shattered the German propaganda about American weakness, as the soldiers discovered that the enemy could inflict more destruction than their own forces possessed. 34-47 Goebbels's diary entry on December 28 noted the serious morale problems plaguing the troops. Frontline accounts from soldiers undermined the narrative of American inferiority. 34:08 Yet tales of German supremacy could not withstand the onslaught of American logistical might. 34-14 The failure of the Ardennes offensive left Germany with no choice but a desperate defense. 34-22 At Nuremberg, General Jodl testified, "After the Ardennes, we knew it was lost. 34-28 We had played our final hand, only to find the enemy held all the winning cards." 34-33 Recognizing German desperation, the Allies turned their attention to crippling fuel production. 34-38 By February 1945, German fuel output had ceased entirely. The Luftwaffe was grounded, and training was halted. 34-47 The Wehrmacht became static, systematically destroyed by the Allies' mobile forces. 34-52 The spring of 1945 brought surreal scenes, as German units surrendered not from defeat, but from sheer immobility. 34-57 Entire panzer divisions sat helplessly as the Allies advanced. The German forces under Major General Fritz Baulein found themselves in a precarious situation during the waning days of the war. They had a mere 42 operational tanks, manned by experienced crews and equipped with ammunition. However, their fuel reserves were alarmingly low, with only 300 liters available, insufficient to reach the next town. Faced with this dire predicament, they had no choice but to destroy their tanks and surrender to the advancing American forces. Meanwhile, the American advance was largely unimpeded, constrained only by the sheer abundance of their vehicles. The Third Army alone boasted an impressive fleet of 15,000 vehicles. The fuel crisis experienced at Kampfgruppe Peiper underscored how industrial capacity ultimately determined the outcome of World War II. As Peiper surveyed the captured Jerrys that fateful December morning, he gained a profound understanding of the stark contrast between the two sides. The enemy's profligacy far exceeded their own needs. The numbers tell a compelling story. While the German offensive allocation amounted to 5 million gallons, the Americans managed to destroy a staggering 8 million gallons of fuel. Moreover, the daily American consumption reached an astounding 7.5 million gallons, a testament to their overwhelming industrial might. The capture of Peiper at Honsfeld marked a significant moment, with 50,000 gallons representing a mere 0.6% of the daily American supply. The Battle of the Bulge claimed the lives of 19,000 Americans, while the German toll may have reached 100,000. This devastating conflict ultimately depleted the Wehrmacht's last reserves, but its lasting impact was the dissemination of knowledge throughout German ranks. America's industrial might was truly incomprehensible, and Peiper's discovery revealed not just a fuel shortage, but the very nature of modern warfare. Victory would belong to the nation that could produce the most petroleum, steel, and aluminum, a contest in which Germany never stood a chance. The final irony was witnessed by American forces cataloging abandoned German equipment at Yaz, where they found 39 perfectly functional tanks left behind solely due to a lack of fuel. Major Robert Harrison's salvage report noted the requirement of 8,000 gallons, a classification deemed minimal, with a recovery time of just 4 hours, a task that had once seemed impossible. The German forces faced a critical fuel shortage, with their best tanks requiring a mere 8,000 gallons, a figure that paled in comparison to the American abundance. This minor request, utilizing local reserves, exceeded the peak strength of Gruppe Peiper's forces, as Peiper discovered at Honsfeld. The revelation was not just that America possessed more fuel, but that their industrial capacity operated on a scale that rendered German scarcity irrelevant. The war's outcome was sealed when America's industrial might was mobilized, a truth that had been evident since 1942. Germany fought a losing battle, measuring defeat in gallons, while America's triumph was measured in oceans. The Tiger tank, now a relic in Leglas's museum, its fuel gauge permanently empty, stands as a monument to the clash between tactical excellence and logistical reality, where the latter emerged victorious. Visitors to the museum often wonder why such powerful tanks were abandoned, and the answer is simple: a lack of fuel.